Well, hello, and welcome. Yes, we'll get this right eventually. Welcome to GM Chat with Mike and Jeff. As I click on all the wrong things. Right. Take it, Mike.
That'll help.
Apparently, I'm useless today, so.
Well, that's fine because I'll be fighting with Sprint for any kind of internet airtime today, so we'll see how far that flies. But for as long as it does, I am Mike. I am your not so friendly neighborhood GM, and Jeff here, my co-host, is your friendly neighborhood GM.
Yeah. Fine. Just go ahead and spread that around, why don't you? But we'd also like to welcome our very first guest.
Yeah.
Good friend of ours, one of the viewers of this show. Our friend Buddy, who is, like Mike and I, somebody who has been playing RPGs, pen and pencil and paper, tabletop, card, for a very long time, just like me and Mike.
Yes, a very long time. How are you, gentlemen?
We're doing good.
Good to be on the show.
Fighting internet issues as always, but
yes,
you know.
Yes, I understand.
When does that not happen?
True.
Yep.
True.
So, what I want to do is start off, kind of give you the opportunity to do what Mike and I have done throughout the past shows, and talk a little bit about how you got into gaming. Like, what did you find first, and how did you get involved, and how did that all come about?
Okay. Well, it goes back quite a ways. Goes back. I think the first time I've ever played Dungeons and Dragons, that was my first. It was the first, so it was the only one that was around. But I think I played my first game in 1977, which was a long time ago. I was probably 9 or 10 or so, I'm guessing. And at the time, I'm not sure what exactly version was actually available, but the one that we played was the original version that was just essentially a series of booklets. There were no boxes, there were no sets of any kind. It was just kind of a series of booklets. There was one for Melee and one for Monsters and one for Magic, and then there was one that was a setting, I think, and that was like the original Greyhawk.
So not too far removed from the days of it being called chainmail.
Not too far, no, not too far. Chainmail was just a couple of years before that. I'd been kind of interested in some stuff like that. I had some friends that were war gamers, and they always had like the coolest toys. They had all the cool miniatures, and
right.
I always remember being fascinated by it because I never understood what the hell they were talking about. And even when they'd be playing it, and I'd be over at one of their houses for another reason. They'd have everything all spread out on the table, and they'd be playing it, and I'd be fascinated even though I had not a clue as to what was going on. Sure. But it sounded cool. And then one of my friends had mentioned that he had invested in these booklets for Dungeons and Dragons and asked me if I wanted to play. I said, yeah, sure. Don't know what I'm doing, but yeah. And I believe, I'm not 100% sure of this, but I believe my first character was a fighting man. Because that's what the character class was called. Right. Before it was fighter, it was fighting man. And I seem to remember that there was some kind of a showdown between me and a couple of orcs. That was about it. It took like the entire evening to do that, to play one combat. As the game master was brand new, he was really the guy that bought the books. And that was the first time he'd ever done anything. And it took probably a couple hours just to roll up the character, figuring everything out. But I remember I didn't really understand most of what was going on, but I loved it. I believe I killed my first orc, and then the second orc squashed me with a mace. And I think that was my first experience. But I had a huge amount of fun doing it, and it was just fun hanging out with my friends in their basement and doing this. So the next thing I got into was Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, because that was brand new.
Yep.
That was really that had just come out, and that's when I really started playing like somewhat regularly. I guess we were allowed to use a room in the library of my school. I can't remember how we managed to do that, but somehow we got the use of a room in the back of a library, our school library, every Tuesday or something. I don't remember which day it was, but and that's when I first started sort of playing. My first character that I remember playing with regularity was an elf. And yes, that was a class back then.
Elf and dwarf, both classes.
They were both classes, and that was my first character. And I played with that character for a couple of times until he got roasted by a red dragon. Yes, one does. I think at maybe second or third level, it got roasted by a red dragon. But I remember being hooked, even at that point. But even so, I kind of was interested in running after that. Mostly, I generally found that when people start deciding that they want to be a game master, it's one of two reasons. One, either they had a game master that was really good and they inspired them to try it themselves, or two, which is the reason that I had, the game master was extraordinarily bad, and the player says, I can do better than that. And that's exactly what my situation was. The game master was not particularly wonderful, and I said, I think I can do better than this. So I remember buying the Monster Manual, the Advanced Dungeons and Dragons Monster Manual. That was the first book I ever bought myself for Dungeons and Dragons, and that, boy, if that didn't, playing didn't light my imagination, buying that book did. Because I'll tell you, going through and seeing all the different kinds of things that you can encounter, and all of the background on everything, and that just, my mind just exploded. I think when I first got that, and I said, "Oh, I got to do this." So it was probably about 1978 or so when I ran my first game, and that I really loved. I really loved doing that. So from Dungeons and Dragons, I kind of hopped around to other games as well. At the time, TSR, who made Dungeons & Dragons, they were really about the only game in town for a little while. So I tried most of their other games. I tried Boot Hill was one of the other games that I played, which was a Western game.
I remember that.
Remember Boot Hill? Top Secret, which was a spy game with really confusing rules. There was a science fiction game, I think, that they made.
Star Frontiers.
Star Frontiers came later.
Oh, okay.
Star Frontiers came later. There was one they had before that, which I think was called something like Metamorphosis Alpha or something like that.
No, I don't know.
I'm not 100% sure of that name, but it was a science fiction game. Yeah, then Star Frontiers came afterwards, and I got into that. But eventually, someone, of course, got me into Traveler, which to this day I will never understand. The Traveler system.
No, we've talked about that, because we talked about some of the other games that we looked at when we were first starting out, and I remember getting the Traveler rules, like buying the Traveler rules, and then reading through it and encountering this word, hexadecimal, and going, and that was the end of me in Traveler.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, I think I found Traveler interesting, but it was so character generation was so convoluted, and almost everything was random, and it took hours, if not days, to make up your character. And because so many things happened at random, this was the only game I ever encountered this. You could actually die of old age before the game started. During character creation, you could actually die before you started playing as a result of a random roll.
Counterintuitive.
I think there may be a flaw in the game system.
Exactly, and that actually happened to one of the people I was rolling up my first character with. I think about on day 3 we had gotten to that, and he'd been
That's
through
great.
all of that, and a freak die roll killed him before we even started playing. So that was, I didn't get too much into Traveler, but say Star Frontiers was a good sci-fi game.
Now TSR came out with Gamma World, right?
Yep.
Gamma World was big into Gamma. The Gamma World was a system that, as rough as it was, it worked. Yep. Better than a lot of those other games. Those other games kind of faded away, but Gamma World is still around. And I loved Gamma. I got into Gamma World probably in about its 2nd edition, maybe somewhere around there. Loved Gamma World. Both ran and played Gamma World for years and years. And in fact, fairly recently, I ran a one-shot of the latest edition of Gamma World for some of you. Jeff, I believe you were, and you too, Mike. You were both involved in that.
Yep.
You know, just because. So I'm still, I guess, technically into Gamma Worlds. I think it's a lot of fun, but
somewhere in my
stuff, lots of other games.
Somewhere in my stuff packed away, I still have my water-damaged, Coca-Cola stained 1st edition Gamma World rulebook.
Oh wow!
Yeah.
Wow, that's
all
great.
I remember about Gamma World back in the day was the Larry Elmore artwork on the covers.
Yep.
Oh yeah.
That just made me drool, and I'm like, oh, that game looks cool, because I was judging the book by its cover, literally.
Quite literally, yes.
Yep. The thing that I remember most about Gamma World wasn't Gamma World. It was the introduction to Gamma World that was written for Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, the module Expedition to Barrier Peaks.
Yeah, actually, I think that was written for Starship or Metamorphosis Alpha, I think, originally.
Oh, okay.
And then someone got the idea to port it into Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. Still, to this day, one of the most notorious modules ever.
I absolutely adored that module.
I remember running that module a couple of times. Great fun, and such a mind blower to the players who are so used to, high fantasy, and then here the next thing you know, they're exploring a spaceship.
Yep.
And dealing with powered armor and laser guns and things like that.
A cylinder of a crashed space station, if I remember correctly.
I think so, something like that. Yeah, that had crashed to Earth years and years ago. And
yep.
And you had to explore, and you had to deal with key cards.
All the different colors.
All the different colors, and you could actually find, stun pistols and, laser rifles and flamers and of course the powered armor. That was the big thing, was the powered armor. And fought all these strange monsters you never fought anywhere else.
Yeah,
which are now, a lot of them are now standard in D&D.
Like Vegapygmies.
Vegapygmies was one of them.
The first time I ever encountered Vegapygmies was in that module.
Yeah, well, that's the first time they ever showed up, was in that module. That and of course the Frogamoth, the frog behemoth with the 3 eyes. That was originally in that module. So that was the same series that also had White Plume Mountain and Tomb of Horrors, of course, probably the most famous dungeon of all.
Yep. So you've played. I assume just about every edition of Dungeons and Dragons.
I have officially played every kind of one. A couple that I didn't play much.
There's one that apparently no one played much.
That would be fourth. That would be fourth, which I tried and said, nah, this sucks.
Yep, that was pretty much my response too. But
that's pretty much the consensus overall. That
yeah. I mean, it was an interesting idea, and some of what they came up with in fourth helped them create fifth.
Sure.
Like the concept of the cantrip actually started in the fourth edition system. That idea of just, having abilities that you can just use at will, and they're just sort of like low power stuff.
Yeah.
But of all the ones that you've run, which one do you find you like the best?
Oh, that's kind of a tall order. Because
Yeah, it was for us too.
there's two of them. True. There's two of them, but I like them for different reasons. I would have to say, if I had to pick one of all of them, that's my favorite. It's probably third, but fifth is very close. I like fifth for a lot of reasons. I would choose fifth if I were to start a brand new campaign with players, particularly newer players. I'd probably go right to fifth.
Yeah.
Fifth is a great system for newer players and to get people into Dungeons and Dragons. And it really is a great system.
Yeah.
So I really like fifth, but I think I probably have a soft spot for third. Just because I actually like the kind of crunchier rules, but primarily I like the more powerful magic. I've always been about the powerful magic, so much so that most of my house rules deal with making magic more powerful. And I like that I like the different variety of spells and magic items and everything. So the game that I run regularly is third edition, with some things borrowed from 3.5. But that's, if I had to pick one, it would be third. But for long-time gaming and for veteran gamers, I'd probably choose third, but I would choose fifth to run for like newer players and things, for sure, because I really love that system too.
Now, this is a stacked question, of course, but Mike and I both talked about this. Out of all the editions, what's your favorite game mechanic?
What's my favorite game mechanic?
Greco.
Yeah. Actually, there was something I remember even more convoluted than THAC0 was trying to figure out the weapon speed factors from Advanced Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah, I forgot about
my
that.
God, who the heck came up with this system? I realized they were trying to make it more realistic. Yes, this particular weapon is going to be better against this particular type of armor. But I remember when I first started to run Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, we tried to use all of those rules. And I mean, it took all night to run like one combat. It took so long to figure out what they needed to hit.
It was quite Machiavelli, definitely.
Oh my God! Yeah, you had to look at these tables. It was based on the class that you were and the level you were in that class versus the armor class, which at that time was 10 at the worst. Like when you were naked, you were 10, and it went down from there.
Yep.
The lower the armor class, the better, down to -10, which was
right.
That's as low as the list went. Supposedly that's as low as it went, even though the Deities and Demigods book had a couple that were a little lower than -10. I remember that. You had to find that number, and then you had to factor in strength. You had to factor in, the weapon speed factor, which was, oh my God, was that a nightmare? And it really took, and of course you had distance and footing and everything else. And oh my God, we just went, please, we have more to our lives than this.
Right.
So if I had to pick a mechanic that probably didn't work, that's the one I would pick. But you want a good one, right?
Yeah.
I think I don't know if I can I pick a house rule or
sure,
or does it have to be an actual published rule?
No, you can a house rule.
But I guess it's official for fifth. So I like the idea of cantrips and the idea that you have certain spells that you can cast whenever you want, without expending like any points or any slots or anything like that. I kind of fought with TSR over that for a while. So I was part of the playtesting group for 5th edition. And that was the one thing that I wrote almost every response that I had to give when they'd send out a new package. We'd play test it, and then you had to send in a response. Almost every response had something to do with that. I hope maybe it factored in at some point, but I like that idea. I like the idea that you minor things, but you have there are some things that like wizards and clerics and things should be able to do pretty much all the time without worrying about running out of magic points. Things like lighting your pipe with your thumb, or stuff like that. I mean, you should be able to do. Druids
Absolutely.
druids creating flowers and things just out of thin air. Minor stuff. But you should be able to detect magic, and things like that. But without worrying about that. So even in third, I think officially you had to spend a slot on cantrips, but that was something that I changed pretty quickly. I like the idea.
Now, I will say this.
Yeah.
I will say this about third is the 0 level spells, which are what cantrips are. You did get a lot of slots when you were a little higher level. So it was almost the same thing. But yeah, I like the unlimited casting for that.
I do too. So they adopted that for fifth. So technically for fourth, I guess too. But they really adopted that for fifth, and I think that's, if I had to pick anything, that's what it would be. And I think wizards get kind of I've always thought that wizards got kind of the shaft in Dungeons and Dragons, and so almost all of my house rules were designed to unshaft them. Is that a phrase?
Well, it is now.
Yeah, there were so many things that kept wizards from being anywhere near the power that you're reading about in books. And fighters could just wade through whole armies of everything without expending anything,
Right.
But wizards got screwed so much. I thought this is not fair. And when I read a book, the wizards are usually the nasty guys, right? It's the wizard that takes out the army as opposed to the knights, as opposed to the fighters. So
Right.
And
that's why Mike and I have talked about this already. That's why I went to a spell point system instead of a spell slot system.
Yeah.
Was just so that I thought that they should have more potential.
I agree.
And
I agree. I did essentially the same thing. I was inspired by Rollmaster. The magic system in Rollmaster has basically that same idea. You get so many spell points based on your stats, I think, for the most part. And then there were other things that could factor in. And then you spent those, basically, if you cast a level 7 spell, you spent 7 spell points. That spell system went up to 50. You could have up to 50 levels of spells.
Oh.
The level 50 spells were the real world destroyers.
Mm-hmm.
But that's how that worked. And you could spend like extra points to to get different effects and things like that. And I love that system, so I sort of adapted a version of it to Dungeons and Dragons.
So that's kind of a segue to my question, which goes back to our first episode. How do you feel about characters who are allegedly overpowered, player characters? Do you believe that a character can be overpowered, or do you think that whatever they want to do to have fun, you can match them in the game?
Well, I'm actually kind of glad that you asked that question. I like both of your answers that you guys gave to it, with maybe a little more reservation, I think. Yes, I do think it is possible for players to be overpowered. I think it's possible for, at least for players, to want to be overpowered or to want too much. Yes, I do think if it turns out that a player like accidentally is more powerful than you think, and that happens to all game masters. You think you have a magic item that's balanced, or you think you have something that's balanced, and the player finds an interesting way to make it more than balanced. That's, I think, where that's where I think a lot of your great ideas would come into, either putting limits on it or, raising what they're facing to the level of that, and sort of dealing with it that way. So I kind of like both of your answers. Yes, a game master can deal with a lot of things. in the game. But I also feel that a game master needs to be able to say no.
Yes,
Because
I agree with
sometimes you
that.
have to. Yeah, sometimes you have to. Sometimes a player will just want something that is so overpowered, or or for whatever reason doesn't fit into the concept of the game.
Right.
And sometimes you just have to say, no, you can't do that.
Right.
And you need the game master needs to feel like that's always an option. And a good player will pretty much accept that, even if they're not getting exactly what they want.
Well,
So
and that's kind of
that's got to be an option too.
Well, that's kind of what I was saying in that episode too. Is
Yeah,
it has to be genre specific.
sure.
You're not going to play the Silver Surfer in my Dungeons and Dragons high fantasy game.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So or Data the android. It's just not going to happen.
Sure.
And there's always limitations. I don't care what kind of character you want. They're not going to be all powerful. There's going to be some kind of limitation.
Yeah.
So I agree with that. And I don't have a problem saying no to a player. One of my favorite things of all time back in the day, Jeff was running a Dungeons and Dragons game, and I said, I want a ring of Superman's power. And he goes, okay, you have a ring that has Superman's power. It does nothing for you. Brilliant. So, I absolutely agree, buddy. I think that's absolutely correct, that you have to be able to tell them no.
Yeah, but of course, as I mentioned, there are going to be times when something gets into the game, either that you thought was balanced or that you intended to be balanced, or just, you never know. Players are very clever people, and something may wind up being broken in the game. Yeah. So there are a number of ways to deal with it.
Of course, my favorite way is it gets nullified and it's no longer usable, or it gets nerfed some kind of way. But I try to restrict that because I absolutely hate nerfing. But
sure.
If they find some super clever way to break my game, that's kind of cool. I mean, I certainly encourage and reward cleverness, but if the artifact or whatever it is outright is just too powerful for the campaign, then you gotta neutralize it somehow.
And that's a very interesting thing that you bring up, because there is a difference. This is mostly for the game masters. There is a difference between a player finding a way to make something overpowered. And there's a difference between that and finding a way to surprise you with a very clever use of something.
Yes.
That is not necessarily broken. In fact, a lot of the times, the game master kind of also needs to be able to let something like that go. Just because the game master didn't think of it, and a player finds a really clever way of overcoming a problem that the game master has set, that in itself does not necessarily mean it's overpowered, and that I think is good, to find a way to let that happen if it doesn't screw up like too much in the game, like if it doesn't completely bring your game to a halt.
Right.
I bring up as an example a game that I ran at Gen Con. I've run a lot of games at Gen Con in the past. And this was a game for GURPS, which was a system that you could do anything with, essentially. I was running a time travel game. And I had a nice little ending and such all planned out. But during the course of the game, some really clever player interaction and taking the stuff that I had given them and doing some really creative stuff with it, they came up with a way better ending for my story than I ever did. So not only did I let that happen, but I adopted it for the rest of the sessions that I was going to run. I changed my game and added that as if it were the way all the time. And the players had no clue that, I had done that. None of the players did. But they came up with such a great idea. I had to adopt it. It was absolutely brilliant. So always be on the lookout for stuff like that. In fact, I love that about being a game master. When you have something and the players come up with a really creative way of getting past it, that's great. I love when that happens.
Yeah.
All right.
Murder hobo or role play? What's your favorite?
There's time for both. I know that's fence sitting, I know, but probably more recently I'm more interested in role playing, I think. One of the comments, again, at Gen Con, one of the comments I got, I would often get from players at the end of it where they were so happy that my game was mostly role playing. And one player in particular, even though it was a really high-powered game, there were maybe 3 rolls in the entire session. And one of the players noted that, and he came up to me afterwards and says, I think we maybe rolled the dice maybe 3 times during the whole session. That was great. I love that. It was so much role-playing, we almost never even used the dice. And he thought that it was one of the best compliments I ever received. So while I think there's places for both of those things, probably later in my DMing career, if that's a thing, I'm probably more interested in the role playing, but I understand the murder hobo too.
Well, the murder hoboing was what we did back, in the 70s and 80s. That
did a whole lot of it.
How you played D&D. And until people started to figure out, hey, you could actually get into the roles of these characters and live their life.
You can start incorporating a little bit of theater into this.
Oh, yeah. Oh, and as an old theater nerd, that I am, that was always of interest. And in fact, the first people I ever played with were theater nerds.
Oh,
that's who got me into D&D in the first place. Were some fellow theater nerds. So
I was gonna say the first people that I played with. Yeah, I have to add a third reason why people Dungeon Master, because you don't know anyone else who does.
Oh, that is another reason, because you're the one who bought the books and nobody else wants to try it.
Yeah, that was me.
Yeah.
That was me when I actually got started. I think my first real group was people that I knew from work when I was an usher at a movie theater. And Mike was one of my original first group players.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that is another reason. Yeah, you're the one who bought the book and or nobody else wants to try it. So it's like, you can't find another game master? I guess I'll do it.
Yep.
Yep, that's it.
So we talked about the fact that apparently Dungeons & Dragons is the gateway drug for pretty much every gamer our age.
Oh, yeah.
But
it's the only drug there was.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, for a while it was.
Apart from sort of the Roll20 game system, what other game systems have you found since then that you really liked?
Oh boy, there's a lot. For a while, I was really into other systems. I liked the idea of systems that, of course, tried other genres and tried other ways of gaming, and that had other mechanics. Mm-hmm. And I really I always kind of had this idea of writing my own game someday. I've since given that up. But I always had this kind of idea that maybe someday I would write my own game. So I got really fascinated with game mechanics. And I would look at all kinds of different games that had anything sort of different or unique about the mechanics. And some of those I wound up playing. So let's see. Probably my 2 favorite games apart from Dungeons and Dragons that I've played and run regularly would be GURPS, again, the generic universal role-playing system. 3rd edition, I know it has since moved into 4th, I spent so much money on the third that I refused to buy any more books for GURPS. So I stopped playing anymore apart from third edition. GURPS was a great system because it was very simple, or it could be as complicated as you wanted. You could make it ultra super crunchy or really, really simple, like mind-numbingly simple, or anything in between. And of course, you could do whatever you want with it. It was generic, so you could, I could use that system to make genres that didn't exist, that nobody had games for, including one of my favorite things was mixing genres, was taking, a couple, 2 or 3 different genres and sort of mixing them together. And I probably ran GURPS at Gen Con almost every single year that I went, because I really loved, I did a different thing every year, So I love GURPS, but speaking of combining genres, probably my favorite game apart from D&D, both to run and to play, would be Torg. The original edition, not that's currently been remade. I don't like the remake so much. Sorry, guys. But the original system, for all the problems that it had, which it did, I loved Torg. Torg had one of the greatest backgrounds of any game that I can imagine, and it was a multi-genre. You could take your elf magic user, from a fantasy world, and take him into a cyberpunk world, and then take him on a spaceship into orbit and fight aliens, and then bring him into and his companion could be a werewolf, from a Victorian horror world, and you had cyborgs and biker gangs and almost anything that you could think of, martial artists and stuff. It had everything, and a great world system to blend all of that. And it had one of the coolest series of mechanics that really fit the world very well. It was a very cinematic game. This was the kind of game where you could do stuff that you had seen in Indiana Jones, In fact, that was one of the worlds that was available, the Nile Empire, which was a pulp fiction kind of reality. So I mean, I literally would have players when we would play Torg, and I played that for a very long time. We would literally have players say stuff like, okay, I burst through the door, I jump over the car, I roll under the table, I throw one grenade in this direction, I throw another grenade in this direction, I draw both my guns, and I shoot the main bad guy. What do I roll? And you can
there was the rival game system to that was made by Palladium Games, Riffs. But where Torg was more cinematic, Riffs was very anime.
Oh yeah, Riffs was much more murder hobo too, a lot crunchier rolls.
The combat system wasn't too bad. Actually making a character was a nightmare.
Yes, it was. Yes, it was.
But it was a more anime style. Like you wanted to be a Super Saiyan from Dragon Ball that could crack moons in half. That's the game for you.
And I remember a lot of mechs and power suits.
They had the RoboCop franchise for a while in their thing, and the Robotech, and Macross.
Mm-hmm.
They had that. Yep, they definitely had that. But there was virtually any genre you could possibly conceive of. They had a source book.
Yeah, I played Riffs for a while as well, and I liked Riffs, but Torg was even more fun because I liked the world better, and it was more cinematic. And one of the main things was the player had some control over very important moments. There's always that time in almost any game when the player wants to or needs to do something really important. That big cinematic moment right toward the end of the movie, and the player rolls the dice and gets a natural one. That kind of thing. And I kind of feel bad for that player sometimes. But with Torg, you had all kinds of ways to save up certain points and certain there was a card system that you used where you could build up to your climactic moment, and you had some control over really important stuff. If you really needed a roll to be really high, you could do it. It cost you, something, but the player had a little bit more control over important moments. And I really liked that because it made a lot more sense in the story. At that big climactic moment, the player should be able to do something amazing, and if the dice don't do it, or if they don't maybe have the skills high enough to do whatever they're doing, it's kind of too bad, because in the story it would make sense. Mm-hmm. Well, Torg had a mechanic that allowed that to happen. And I think that was one of the really interesting things about Torg, was that the players had a little more agency. Occasionally, they couldn't get away with anything. In fact, if you wanted to hose them, you had a lot of ways to do that in Torg as well. But the players had this kind of unique form of agency, and I've seen other games do similar things. You mentioned the Cypher system. Cypher system has a way of doing that. Torg was one of the first. Yeah, Torg was one of the first games that I saw that really kind of gave a sense of agency, maybe a little bit more to players than a lot of other games, and just this whole cinematic nature of it. It was a lot of fun. And Torg also had. Was the first game, and this is, I think, what wound up screwing it, because they were actually ahead of their time on this. They actually had a global campaign. There was one main campaign, which you could feel free to use any parts of or reject any parts of or whatever. You didn't have to follow it. But everybody in that played Torg could, if you played an official module, could fill out a form and send it into the home company, and it would change the campaign. It would actually change what system or what supplements they released, and it would change the world map. It would change. Your characters could really do something that officially changed the game. And it also was one of the few games that had a definitive ending for the official campaign. They had a module, kind of a double-sized module called War's End, which officially ended their campaign. It's the only game system I've ever known that could do that. Unfortunately, the game came out in 1990, which is kind of before people were really on the internet. And even though there were a number of people starting to get that way, the company didn't really follow that aspect. If they had done so, Torg would still be a big thing today. But they never did. They never really went to like an online thing, and I think they suffered for it. If they had done that, I think it would have exploded. But because they'd have been the first ones on that scene, they just kind of that little bit of lack of foresight. And I think the official game ended in 1995, I think. But if they'd have kept that up, they'd have been pioneers for sure. But that's probably my favorite. There's a number of other games that I liked for different reasons. Teenagers from Outer Space was my favorite comedy game. When you had nothing else, you had no time to prep. Everybody said, "Hey, let's role play something." Okay, give me like 3 minutes to come up with a storyline, and we'll start playing. It's such a simple system. It's basically Galaxy High. I don't know if you remember that cartoon. Yeah. That was basically the aliens have come to Earth in the 1980s, and that's the world you live in. So you have to deal with alien uprisings, and you have to get your homework in on time. You got to find it. You got to find it. Yeah, Toon I played too. Geez. I loved Toon. I played as a player and as an animator. Toon was great fun. Yeah, Toon had like no rules at all. Basically,
I know.
Toon was great fun.
You have one last question for him, and then that'll probably take us up to our final thing, Jeff.
Well, seeing as how of all the episodes we've done, this one seems to have gotten the most response. I will put the question to you, both as a player and as a game master. What are your pet peeves?
Boy, pet peeves. Well, these are probably pretty common, I think, for most game masters. Pet peeves, of course, probably one of the main ones, no matter what game you play, are the players that hog the spotlight, that think everything is about them, and don't seem to realize that this is a shared story. That everybody has a hand in this story, and it's not all about you getting the glory. You know what I mean? I'm very fortunate to play with, people like you, who don't do that, and people that I play with regularly who don't do that, who, can take the spotlight when they need to, but they're also good with someone else taking the spotlight for a little while, or even the group taking the spotlight. That's a big one. When you've got a player that just thinks it's all about them. That's the kind of time when you either talk to them about that, or if it's just not solvable, then you stop inviting that person, because that's a big one. That's a big one.
Yeah, I think we talked about that too.
Yeah. As far as a game master goes, I think when the game master has made a ruling, essentially, and it might not be the most popular ruling, but eventually, the ruling has to stand. Hopefully, everybody is okay, at least with the idea that this is the way it's going to be in this campaign. And while disagreements are absolutely fine, when a player can't deal with it, and argues about it every time it comes up, or brings it up all the time, or anything like that. Okay, I understand that you disagree with this, but this is the way it runs, in the campaign. I guess you can, if you ran your own game, you could change that. But the way this is in this game, just if the game master makes a ruling, even if it's not hugely popular, if you don't agree with it necessarily, it's best to go along with it, because that's what the game master thinks about these things, and puts a lot of thought into stuff like that. So
the game master can make a temporary solution too. I mean,
and you need to. Yeah, absolutely, you need to.
And stopping the game just to look up a rule, when they can just say, okay, we're doing it this way for now, we'll talk about the rule after the game.
But I reserve the right to change it, in between games. And I've done that several times where, I'll change something. Okay, this is the way we're going to do this now. And then in the middle of the game, I'll, send out an email or something that says, okay, I've been giving it some thought, and this is the way I want to do this from now on. And then sometimes that doesn't work. Sometimes that turns out to be something that needs to be changed too. So if the players are at least just willing to go along with that, that's great. I guess that would be my answer. I don't know if I'm making sense, but
yeah. Now,
right.
what about as a player?
Well, the same thing with players as someone that hogs the spotlight. That's no fun as a player as well. But as a player, let me see. I guess maybe I can sort of turn that backwards towards a player. Game masters that just simply are just not fair. And I've played with numerous game masters like this, particularly in the earlier days. I don't know if you guys probably went through the same thing. Finding games was pretty hard when we were, particularly in the 1980s, when the whole satanic panic thing was around. People didn't advertise that they played. Finding a game was a miracle in some cases, particularly when you lived in a rural area like I did. It was pretty tough to find games, and so you would play with almost anybody that would be willing to run. Well, some of these game masters were not always particularly good, and it's not the ones that didn't know the rules. It's not the ones that struggle. I understand that. That's a different thing, and someone's learning the rules or whatever. That's not a problem. But when someone is sort of blatantly unfair, particularly if someone has a friend or a significant other or something in the game, and everything seems to go in that direction. That player seems to get all of the screen time, all of the treasure, and everybody else kind of is, left with your cheese out in the wind, as it were. That's really tough. Or if they doesn't even interact with you. I remember one game it was Riffs. It was a Riffs game that I played, in which the game master basically separated everybody. And this was the first time I'd ever played with this game master. Basically put everybody in a different room and went to each room and polled them as to what they were going to do, because we were all in different places to start the thing. And I assumed we were all going to be getting together at some point and like working on some problem. That never happened. I sat in a room by myself for as long as an hour to an hour and a half before the game master would come by, ask me what I was going to do. I tell him something, maybe make a roll, and then he'd take off again for another hour. That sucked. I never went back to that game ever again. So there you go.
Wow. Nope. I can't say I've ever encountered that.
Oh, it was terrible.
No.
It was so boring. I didn't know I didn't know this guy. It's the first time I'd ever been to their house. First time I'd ever played with him. I wound up sitting in a room by myself, for 60 to 90 minutes at a time. I made maybe 3 rolls. I don't even remember what we were doing or even who else was playing, because I really never interacted with them. It stunk.
That's foundationally probably the basis for why Jeff and I have been friends for 35 years. Because when you find that person who you mesh with in game, you don't usually tend to let them go too far.
No, you don't.
Well, that's why I like to play with you guys. So absolutely spot on there.
Yep. All right. Well, since you're our first official guest on the show,
victim.
Yes, that too. We were talking about, what we wanted to do when we had guests on, and I made a suggestion to Mike, and it turns out that he is as big a fan of this as I am.
Yes.
We were both huge fans of Inside the Actors Studio with James Lipton.
I used to watch it myself.
And he would always end his interviews with a questionnaire that came from his hero, Bernard Pivot, who used to do them on his show in France. And I mentioned it to Mike, and Mike's response was, to say the least, quite enthusiastic. So we're going to resurrect the questionnaire.
Okay.
And ask it of our guests. So,
okay.
Buddy.
Yes.
What is your favorite word?
Favorite word? Yes. That's a great word.
I think I know where this one's going. What is your least favorite word?
Can't. I hate that word.
Like the insect or the relative?
As in cannot.
Can't.
You mean like the insect
can't.
or the relative ant?
No. He said can't.
Oh, can't.
Yeah,
oh.
Can't. Yeah, as in cannot. That's a tough word. That's a tough word. That's a word that's used as an excuse, I think, far too much.
Yeah. What turns you on creatively, spiritually, or emotionally?
Stories. Not only of Dungeons and Dragons, but movies and television, and just telling stories with my friends. I think that's probably stories.
What turns you off?
Do I have a week to list them? So much. Insensitivity, I think, covers a lot of ground.
Yeah.
Insensitivity. Yeah, that's...
All right. Here's the one that was always fun to watch, and was more fun to watch when you could see it off air, so they wouldn't bleep it. What's your favorite curse word?
All of them. in a big long string. Yes, sort of one after right after another.
Like the George Carlin list.
That's it, all at once. spoken as a reaction, starting at the beginning and going all the way through the list.
And
yeah, I probably curse way more than I ought to. So
do you add on? Do you add on the additional 3, the fart, turd, and twat?
On occasion.
Okay.
On occasion, whatever the situation requires. Yeah, I swear I probably swear more than I ought to.
What sound or noise do you love?
Wow, that's you know what? I think this might be kind of a strange answer. If I'm with my friends and we're together, especially when like a lot of us are together on one of those rare occasions when we can be together. If I step out of the room, like maybe to go into the kitchen or just to go into the other room, and it's quiet sort of where I am, but I can hear the sounds of laughter and the sounds of my friends talking about something in the other room, and knowing that that's what I have waiting for me when I go back. That's one of the greatest sounds in the world. That's one of the greatest sounds in the world.
That's very nice.
Yeah, I love that. Sometimes I'll even just like pause before I go in. If I've stepped out of the room, I don't even pause for a minute just to listen to it for a few seconds, and then go back and sit down. I love that.
What sound or noise do you hate?
Screaming. The human voice raised to angry levels. That usually means something is not good.
What profession other than your own would you like to attempt?
Well, I don't know. Is it a cop out to say professional dungeon master?
No.
Not anymore.
Not anymore.
I would love to try that sometime. I don't know that I could do it. I don't know that I could play a game online, like the way you do.
You get used to it.
It's the scrutiny. I don't know that I could stand, 100 people saying you got this rule wrong, or something like that. Your fun is wrong. How can my fun be wrong?
Yeah.
I would love to try it. I would love to have that as my job. I'd love to be able to get up in the morning and say, this is what I have that I'm responsible for. That'd be awesome.
Point order. How can your fun be wrong? I can just direct you to the Marquis de Sade.
Well, okay.
Yep.
Well, if I'm doing that online, then yeah, somebody ought to stop me.
Yeah.
You probably get a lot of followers.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah,
that's true.
Probably.
What profession would you not like to do?
I know a lot of people would long to be like a doctor or something like that. I don't think I could do that. I really don't think I could do that. There's too many things that could go wrong that have catastrophic results. You have a bad day, you don't get enough sleep, or you're in a bad mood or something. You screw up an operation, and someone goes home without a leg, or someone dies. And that family is now without a mother or without a kid or something like that. And then, of course, having to tell somebody that, even if it's not, the result of your screw up or whatever, that would be bad enough. But just to have to tell someone that, I couldn't do that. I really don't think I could do that regularly. I couldn't do that as a job. I don't think so. Kudos to those who do. That's something I don't think I have the emotional wherewithal to do.
And the last question, especially knowing you as I do, I'm very curious about this one.
Yes.
If heaven exists, What would you like to hear God say when you arrive at the pearly gates?
Well, I would be rather surprised. First off, I guess if that were the case, I would hope he'd say, come on in anyway. I know you done screwed up, but, I don't care. Come on in anyway.
Yeah, you meant well.
I guess that. I think that would be it.
All right. Excellent. Well, thank you so much for coming on.
No, thank you guys for having me. This was a lot of fun.
And that pretty much brings us right up to our hour. So,
Yep. Perfect.
Once again, thank you to Buddy for coming on and being our first guest. And be sure to check out our website, artifactsworldwide.com, and all our social media. Our fall schedule is going to start on Sunday. So there's going to be a couple changes, so you're definitely going to want to take a look at that. For example, starting next week, we will be on in the evening.
Yes.
We are moving to 7 p.m. on Wednesdays. So we'll be, or are we moving to, did we decide 7 or 8? I can't remember. I think we said 8.
Either one doesn't. It works for me. I don't care.
Yeah, I think
Guess we better decide and let people know.
I think we said 8 because we were thinking about people on the West Coast as well. At least that would be after they got out of work.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. 8 o'clock's fine.
Yeah. So starting next week, we'll be on 8 p.m. Eastern U.S. time, 5 p.m. Pacific. For this show.
Mm-hmm.
So.
And hit us up on all of our social media by all means.
Yep.
This will be on YouTube, and we would love for you to hit the like and subscribe and all of that business.
Yep. And if you are of such a mind, we would love to have you follow us on Twitch as well. That would be great.
Yes.
So.
Yep. Trying to build up followers there. So.
Yep. And if you like the show, tell people, point them towards us. We would really appreciate it. So, all right. That's it for us for this week. We'll be back next week on our new schedule, 8 p.m. Eastern U.S., 5 p.m. Pacific, for more GM Chat with Mike and Jeff. Bye, everybody.